Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to talk about sleep. Usually as a speaker, you don't want people to sleep. I do want you to sleep, just not until after we have our conversation tonight. So I want to make sure that I give plenty of time for questions. So we will have kind of a short discussion in the beginning where I can present some things to you. And then I would love to get your questions. You can type those into the chat at any time. There's so much about sleep. It's something that affects all of us. Even if people say that they can't sleep, we all actually have to sleep. So if you're here, I assume that either you're curious, you are too sleepy, or maybe you feel like you're not sleeping enough. The odds are pretty good that you, at least at some point, have had trouble sleeping, because about a third, maybe even almost a half of adults have had some point where they were not sleeping well for 3 or more days. We know what that's like. We know it's frustrating. We know that it can be scary. I'd like to assure you that our bodies want to sleep. Sleep is a lot like eating. You can have a time when you don't really feel that hungry, or you're hungry, but you just can't seem to eat, or something's turning you off, but eventually your body will make you eat. And the same thing is true with sleep. It's just a matter of trying to find that right balance between the things that in our body that make us need to sleep, and then the things that get in the way of us sleeping, which seem to be all too plentiful. So when I was in high school, I had a tendency to procrastinate. And let's just pretend that that was only high school, right? But yeah, I had a tendency of procrastinating. So it might be like the night before something was due. And I had this strategy. I would like work on stuff. And then as I started getting kind of tired, I would sometimes think, okay, well, I'm just gonna sleep for a little bit because I gotta get back up and do stuff. So I would lay on the floor. It was carpeted, but it wasn't super comfortable. And, you know, a lot of times I didn't wake up when I thought I wanted to. So what's the problem with this I'll lay on the floor thing? Well, there's several. First of all, we need to sleep deeply. The way that sleep works, a lot of people have heard that there are 4 stages of sleep plus REM. So basically you can think of it as like shallow sleep, kind of like if you're in water and the waves are up here. So there's a shallow sleep, and then we go into a deeper sleep, and then go into REM sleep, and then go back up. And the cycle repeats itself about every 90 minutes. There is some variation, might be closer to 75 for some people. And people usually go through 4 or 5 cycles through the course of the night, which is where you might get, about 6-7.5 hours of sleep. Well, the problem with me trying to lay on the floor and trying to get a shorter amount of sleep is that the first couple cycles during the night are the most important for restoring your brain and getting you ready for the next day. They're the most important for your memory and being able to think straight and being able to make decisions, and even coordination, being able to drive a car. So if I was going to try and do that like 2 or 3 hours sleep, well, that's going to disrupt those first 5 hours, which is a problem. Now, another obvious problem, as I alluded to, is that I might have this plan to only sleep 3 or 4 hours, or maybe just 2. But that, what we call sleep drive, that build up in the body that says, yeah, you really need to sleep, if it gets strong enough, you will not wake up. For a lot of people who have trouble sleeping, that probably sounds really great. And it can be, but it also can be a real frustration, because if you are sleep deprived, you could find yourself sleeping when you don't want to. You could find yourself dozing off at a traffic light. You could find yourself falling asleep on a conversation or in a meeting. So it's kind of a good news, bad news thing, right? There's a point where our body says, you will sleep, and there's nothing that you can do to stop it. And there are chemicals in the body that just build up and build up and build up, and absolutely can only be quenched by getting sleep. So that's sleep drive. Well, the common thing, as I mentioned, is that a lot of people have trouble sleeping. So that is an issue of arousal. Now, being in bed and being aroused, I guess whether or not it's a problem depends on context, right? But what we find a lot of times is that there are things that are signaling our brains to be awake. It could be that internal clock that we have, the circadian rhythm, maybe that's out of whack. Because that rhythm usually will push us to be more wakeful through the day as we're exposed to sunlight primarily. And then that circadian rhythm, the drive to be awake decreases around to the point that the sleep drive that's pushing us to fall asleep kind of overcomes that. And it should work out such that your wakefulness is decreasing in the evening or whenever it is you need to sleep, while your sleepiness is taking over. So, but the problem is that aside from something like sunlight that can make us feel wakeful, there are other things. Light of any sort actually does tend to make us more awake. If you have blue light glasses, if you set your tablet on, what is that, like evening mode, yeah, it helps, but really our brains just like the light. And when you see that light, you're going to be more awake. It's a pain for those of us who love our phones, who love our tablets, who like to watch TV, because a lot of those things are fun and they're relaxing. But the bad news is that the light is going to affect you. Other things that definitely can get in the way of sleep, as I mentioned, the wakefulness, there's something called Erection. Erection is a hormone in the brain that tries to keep us awake. And for some people, that Erection is at too high of a level at night when we don't want it to be. Or, kind of interestingly, if there's not enough Erection in the daytime, people get things like narcolepsy, where they should be awake, but all of a sudden they doze off. So that can be an issue. Now, by far, what I see is that our brains can get so excited about something or other, a lot of times things that aren't very pleasant, and that can keep us from falling asleep. So I don't camp. I know here in Colorado, a lot of people do, but I don't camp. I know that there are bears out there, not something I'm excited about. I do try and picture if you were in a tent and you heard a bear coming along and you're thinking, this probably isn't going to go so well or might not go so well. If you turned over and fell back asleep, I would be so surprised. Why? Because that fight or flight is telling you, don't fall asleep, right? I like to tell people, if you're being chased by a bear, one of two things is going to happen, probably. Either you're going to get away, you run like crazy, climb, fight, whatever, and you escape, or you don't make it and you get caught by the bear. Either way, falling asleep shouldn't happen, right? So our bodies are primed to keep us awake, because if there's real danger, there should be pretty much nothing that makes you sleep aside from being completely incapacitated. And that's where the challenge can come. I do counseling, I prescribe medication, and a lot of times we're looking at medication to try to help fall asleep. But how much medication would it take to make you sleep if a bear is chasing you? Probably an awful lot. And maybe, send you into a coma, which obviously I don't want to do. And I talk about fight or flight because what that also means is that there is being awake. Okay, there's wakefulness, like maybe you're on a flight all night and, overnight flight, and you feel awake. You're not stressed out about anything. You don't have to do anything, but you just kind of feel awake. But then there's also anxiety. And anxiety, among many things, keeps us awake. And so a lot of the strategies that really are at the heart of trying to help us sleep when there are problems really are geared toward dealing with anxiety. So you might wonder, okay, is it that I'm just being too wakeful, or is it the anxiety? How do I know? Well, one thought I have is think about the daytime. And what if you were stopping and you just sat down and you weren't doing anything, you weren't looking at anything? Would you be able to relax? Or would you still have your mind just going or feeling tense? If that's the case, then what I would say is that anxiety may be part of the issue with falling asleep, but it also probably is part of the issue in your daytime. And for the sake of your quality of life, we want to deal with the anxiety in the daytime as well as at night. In those cases, yes, maybe we can try to manage the anxiety at nighttime, but we want to look at more comprehensive strategies to help you with anxiety all through the day. I was thinking about that expression, sleep like a baby. I slept like a baby. Well, if you have had a newborn or are around newborns, that might mean something different to you, right? Because babies wake up during the night, and especially in the beginning, when they get to a point where they're not hungry every 2 hours, which actually is kind of the initial thing, but when they get to a point where they're not hungry every 2 hours, what they also run into is that they wake up and they're kind of rolling around and they're wondering, what's going on? Am I okay? And they start crying. So sleeping like a baby, interestingly enough, can involve waking up multiple times in the night. What seems to help in various strategies is trying to help babies to wake up, know, okay, I'm okay, and then fall back asleep. So if we're trying to sleep like babies, we may run into problems, but actually part of the solution is the same thing. The sleep cycle, we go deeper into sleep, but then we come back up and we get into that lighter sleep, which is when you're more likely to hear sounds or be sensitive to light around you, or notice things in the bed, when you're cold or hot. And being able to know that that's normal. I'm a little bit more awake, and that's okay. My body is going to do that, and then I'm going to fall back into sleep. The other thing about sleeping like a baby is that for those who have tried to get a baby to sleep successfully, usually you find that you've got to have a routine, right? Especially as babies become bigger babies and kids. Bedtime, right? There's bedtime, a bedtime story, a bedtime bath, because kids a lot of times don't want to go to sleep. For those of us who have had trouble sleeping, yeah, right, that would be like the best thing, to be able to fall asleep easily, and your only problem being that you choose to be awake. But what helps kids to get that regular sleep is they set the bedtime. Your bedtime is 8:30 or 9 o'clock. And as the caregiver or the parent, you try to get them ready. You try to wind down the day, right? You don't, right before bedtime, you don't blast music, you don't watch, scary movies or stuff that's like super fun. You don't give ice cream. Calm down, right? But as adults, a lot of times we're busy, trying to do this, trying to do that. And then you finally get a chance to relax and you watch your phone. And how are you supposed to just stop and fall asleep, right? I don't like, as an adult, having to impose a bedtime. I like sleeping, but there's all these things we have to do all day, right? So why do I have to make myself have a bedtime? Well, that's between you and your body. What I can tell you is that our bodies like rhythm. Our bodies like to have time to go to sleep. We do well to have a consistent bedtime and a consistent waking time. Now, because of your job, because of relationships, because of various things, it may be hard to be consistent, but the more consistent, the better. We have to train our bodies to go to sleep. As some people know, I've got 2 teens, and recently I was teaching one to drive. The scariest thing about teaching someone to drive for me was the braking distance, right? I mean, you're going, and if you don't start slowing down, you're going to run into something, right? So that's another way that I think about trying to get our bodies to slow down and go to sleep. It also is the way that I think about a lot of the medications that come up with, trying to get sleep or supplements that people use. Now, I don't want to get too sciencey. There's a lot of different things. And if people have questions, I'm happy to talk about specific ones. But just as a general concept, a lot of those substances are like slamming on the brakes. It helps you stop, but it's not the healthiest way, right? The best way to come to a stop is to gradually slow down. So that's just another way of looking at why it's so important that we try and train our bodies to sleep. So for people who have had trouble sleeping, a lot of times just talking about it can make you feel kind of tense, right? So I was thinking the other day, I was thinking about my shower. Just, that part of the bathroom. And I tried to picture myself walking in there, maybe take a book in there and maybe my computer or some pens and pencils, get my office chair in there, see if I can get anything done. Well, the reason that I was trying to picture it is because I thought that's weird. To me, being in that space I expect there to be water, right? And just, I'm not expecting to make phone calls and do email. That's the place where I do the water and soap thing, right? So that needs to have a purpose, right? And my brain has assigned a purpose to that spot. Same thing with the bathtub. If I think about my bathtub, I think about being in water and all that stuff. I don't think about doing taxes or talking to my kids about their homework. What often happens, though, with our beds is that we end up doing all kinds of different things in them. And that can actually make our brains associate our bed with a lot of different things. It can be associated with calling family. It can be associated with, in my case, binge watching Netflix. It can be associated with laying there and having trouble falling back asleep. And when that happens, that association gets in the way. In fact, probably the most common issue in terms of insomnia, trouble sleeping, is that the bed becomes a symbol of not sleeping, which is completely unhelpful, right? So what do you do about it, right? Well, there's a few things. One thing is that we know that if your bed is not associated with sleep, we need to kind of reassign the bed. We're going to reassign it to be just for sleep and sex. So that means that if you get in bed and it takes more than 25, 30 minutes to fall asleep, it's very normal. That's very healthy. But if you have that experience where you're in bed and you really have a hard time falling asleep, it's better to wait until you're sleepy and then get in bed, because we need to break that association between the bed and being so awake. Now, the caveat though, is that when you're trying to get sleepy, you have to do the bedtime. You have to do a routine. I wish there was another option, but honestly, there's scientific research. There are years and years and centuries of experience that is what helps us fall asleep. So don't get into bed until you're ready to sleep. Do whatever else you're going to do somewhere else, and then get in bed ready to sleep. The other thing in breaking the association is to be able to reassure yourself that the bed is not a dangerous place. Well, dangerous, what I mean by that is that it's not a place that is going to do you harm. You wake up and you're awake in the middle of the night. The natural thought often is, oh my gosh, I'm awake. I'm not going to be able to fall asleep. I'm going to feel really cranky tomorrow. I'm not going to be able to do work, and it's just going to be terrible. And, and absolutely, there are consequences of not sleeping. It has a negative impact on our immune system. It can increase your risk for a lot of different conditions like diabetes, heart disease, even cancer. But in that moment, that one night, it's going to happen. What's going to happen is going to happen. While you're working on making changes and trying to train your body to sleep, one night, thankfully, is usually not going to wreck everything. So to be able to say, okay, I'm awake, but that's okay. I'm going to be okay. And I'm not discounting how stressful it can be. What I am wanting to emphasize is that anxiety about not sleeping makes it harder to sleep. Nobody wants to feel the anxiety, but that's what we're dealing with, right? We need to decrease the anxiety. So you recognize that it's a situation that we can deal with. You can recognize that if you've had difficulty falling back asleep for an hour, if it's getting to be 55, 60 minutes, it is better to get out of bed. You don't want to just lay there fighting it. Get out of bed, try to do something calming, whether it's like listening to music or drinking some tea or doing some breathing exercises. I'll provide in that handout. I can email it out. Some specific suggestions on things to do to try to calm down your nervous system. And then when you're feeling more ready to fall back asleep, you get back in bed. Now, there's also something kind of interesting about that waking up in the middle of the night. Scientifically, I looked at research, and scientifically, it really does seem like we should stay asleep. Like that really is, the goal. At least continue that cycle of sleep, deep sleep, shallow sleep, deep sleep. Getting up in the middle of the night and staying up for hours on end probably is not the best thing. Before we had electric lights, which I'm not that old, so I don't remember, but before we had artificial light, When the sun went down, there wasn't a whole lot that people could do, right? And so it was not uncommon from the Middle Ages up through probably like pioneer days. If you've ever seen Little House on the Prairie or something, they'd go to bed. I don't know if it was like 7 o'clock, sun goes down, they'd go to bed. They'd sleep for 3-4 hours, get up in the middle of the night, stay up for another 2 or 3 hours, and then go back to bed. There was even a New York Times article recently about segmented sleep, which is this exact same thing. During the pandemic, some people working from home, they have this flexibility, and they were finding that they'd fall asleep, be asleep for a while, wake up in the middle of the night, maybe do some yoga, just relax, have some quiet time, and then they'd go back to sleep for another 3-4 hours. So we know that it's something that people did for centuries. It still may not be the healthiest thing, but the point I want to make is that people did this for centuries. They survived. They didn't die from it. It wasn't the end of the world. Our bodies are able to function that way. It's probably not the healthiest, not what you want, but I do think that it can be reassuring if you find that your pattern is waking up in the middle of the night and staying up. There may be a way that you can make it work. So just to follow up on some general recommendations for what we call sleep hygiene, things that I hadn't mentioned would be temperature. Generally, our bodies like to, or colder temperatures in the room are conducive to sleeping. So if you find that you're too warm, that actually can be a struggle to fall asleep. Or if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're hot, that can be a factor in sleeping. Recently, I myself found something called a chili pad, which is like this mat that goes on the mattress that has like water that runs through it. I mean, it's like contained, but essentially it really is like an active cooling system. It takes heat away from the body. I think it's wonderful. Kind of pricey, but I'll put a link if it's something you want to look into. Definitely, especially for people who maybe have trouble getting the temperature in their bedroom to be controlled, whether it's the design of the place you live in or, the temperature, like in my house, if it's too cold in my room, if it's too cold in my room, then it is absolutely frigid on the lower floor. And, I turned my daughter into an icicle. So I'll put the link for that. I mentioned light. Light makes us want to stay awake. So having a dark space to sleep generally is going to be the thing that helps. For people who work at night, I think most of them know quite well that blackout shades are your friend because your body wants to have dark. And that is an important thing for helping you sleep. I mentioned the issue with trying to have a consistent bedtime, consistent wake time. Part of that is also that you want to minimize the number of times that you hit snooze. Because what that does, if you're laying in bed and hitting your alarm over and over, is that it's just giving you disrupted sleep toward the end of that time that you're trying to sleep. And that is either interfering with time when you could have been sleeping more deeply, which you need in order to be healthier and restored, or you get to lighter sleep, your alarm's going off and, over and over, and then your body actually tries to get back into deeper sleep, which just makes it that much harder. So, you want to minimize minimize using the snooze button. And then a final thing I wanted to comment on is a lot of people have smartwatches. One of the main reasons I got a smartwatch was that I thought it could help me with sleep. So I was really curious about this. I looked into it. What seems to be true about, whether it's Samsung Watch, Apple Watch, Fitbit, there's some other very specialized devices. More than anything else, they seem to be accurate in telling you how long you were in bed, and how much you moved around. From research, it seems that they're not really that good at telling you, were you in REM sleep? Were you in deep delta wave sleep? Were you in more shallow sleep? Because it's just based on movement. The kind of the correlation is that when you're in the deepest sleep, you don't move around. Your muscles are relaxed and you shouldn't be kicking and screaming, which is, again, a whole other complication. So what I would say is that using a sleep tracker is really great for seeing what time did I get in bed, what time did I get out of bed, was I really restless through the night? And that itself can give you some cues about what's going on with your sleep. And then give you a chance to come and discuss it with me or somebody else who may be able to assist you. So I'm going to wrap up my part. I've talked about the issues that people may have with sleep, falling asleep, which we call early insomnia, staying asleep, middle insomnia, or waking up too early in the morning, too soon, that's late insomnia. So what do people often do? Well, what do we know about different substances? We know that alcohol may help you fall asleep or may put you to sleep, but it's not really the same as real sleep, and it interrupts REM sleep, which in turn is a negative for our brains. So it's not quite the same as sleep, even though it may make you kind of zonk out, and probably primarily it helps you not feel anxious until maybe later when it does make you feel anxious, but that's a whole other thing. Also, there are herbal things that people take. By and large, herbal remedies are not problematic. The effectiveness varies from person to person. Research is, a lot of times it's hard for them to pin down whether, say, magnesium is helpful or zinc or, chamomile. I mean, sometimes it's hard to prove what works, but if it works for you, you know it. And so I find that can be perfectly healthy. Melatonin, I wouldn't say it's an herb, it's a supplement to something that's already made in our brains that is part of that circadian rhythm. When you have more melatonin, it tells your body go to sleep. Supplementing with melatonin can work. It doesn't, what's interesting is that it doesn't change the anxiety piece. So it may help your body be more sleepy, but you still end up needing to work on the anxiety piece if that's what's going on. And I think for that reason, some people think melatonin is great and it works so well for them. And then other people say, oh, it didn't do much for me. And I think that often is because either there's some, significant arousal going on in terms of anxiety, or there is something else going on in terms of, some other disorder. And there are a lot of them. They're not most common, but there are. And, we could have a separate discussion about that another time. Cannabis, Colorado, right? So lots of people have cannabis. I try to go with the research. I'm not here to judge. So I was kind of curious, and what I see and what scientists have found is that probably more than anything else, marijuana, weed, cannabis helps with the anxiety. It helps people relax and therefore be able to fall asleep. As to whether it makes you sleepy, it's kind of debatable. It can, but it doesn't always. And what's curious to me is that the active part of weed or cannabis that is associated with the high, so to speak, is the THC. And that pretty consistently is relaxing and maybe helps people fall asleep. The other part, CBD, cannabidiol, is definitely seems to be helpful for anxiety, but it's possible that it doesn't help people be more sleepy. And I say possible because there's not a lot of research about it, but I just found that curious because generally I think CBD is really great. It doesn't, have the high associated with it. It's a lot of CBD products are sold over the counter. They don't have to be sold in a dispensary. Really, the biggest complication with cannabis is that if you have been exposed to a lot of it, smoking or using edibles, it can be difficult to sleep if you decrease or stop having the cannabis in your system. And so while you're using it, maybe it can be a positive, but if you have job issues where you can't, where you're tested for cannabis, you can't have that in your system. Or if there are times when maybe you're traveling, you're going to a place where recreational cannabis or even medical cannabis is not permitted, then you can be set up for a really difficult time with sleeping without it. Other things that people will often use, over-the-counter sleep aids can be helpful, but they have to be used short-term because, especially things like Benadryl, because they cause some cognitive problems, some brain issues if you use them over a long period of time. So just for short periods of time. Again, I would say, we want to look at ways to decrease anxiety. So then I will touch a little bit on sleep medication. The medicines that have the least risk, kind of least chance of problems and seem to be very, effective are medicines that basically stimulate, block histamine receptors. So we all know of antihistamines like Benadryl. And so histamine makes you stay awake. And when you block that antihistamine, then you're going to be more sleepy. And so there are medicines that we use, like trazodone or doxepin or hydroxyzine. People who I get to see probably are familiar with some of these. And those are the ones that seem to be the most safe. The hypnotic medicines, the ones that kind of make you sleepy, the benzodiazepines, like Klonopin and Ativan and Valium and Xanax. The issue with those, I would say, is that your body can get used to them. And similar to cannabis, when you stop having them, it makes it really hard to sleep. And to me, it also, I think of that kind of like how, if the light is on in your room and it's making it hard for you to sleep, you want to go turn it off, right? Well, if you can't access the light switch, if that control is outside of you, if you can't, do anything, then it puts you in a vulnerable position, right? And that's the way I think of those benzodiazepines, is that if that's the thing that helps you sleep and that, helps you feel assured that you will sleep, then it also kind of can make you feel less in control, which itself can feed back into anxiety. There we go, back to the anxiety thing. So it's a challenge. The other thing that I was thinking about in terms of what can cause problems with sleep is sleep apnea. People who maybe are really heavy or snore loudly, it's a pretty obvious thing that maybe they should get tested for sleep apnea, which is periods of time where you pause breathing or don't breathe sufficiently, which decreases your oxygen levels, which causes various neurological and cardiac issues, which then cause problems with sleep, which compounds those problems. So we have found that people who are not overweight, who don't necessarily have a thick neck, that was what the theory was for decades, that, classically the guy who's got a big neck is heavy. We thought that that's like a necessity in order to have sleep apnea, and that unfortunately is not true. People who are thin and athletic can have sleep apnea. So the question would be like, well, when should I be concerned that that could be a factor? Well, if you have a partner or a family member who says that you snore and they think that you pause, there are pauses in your breathing, then that could be something that's concerning. If you wake up with a headache, a lot of times that seems to be a sign of low oxygen at night, and increases the suspicion of sleep apnea. If you're excessively sleepy all through the day, that is another reason to possibly suspect sleep apnea. And kids can have sleep apnea too. In fact, I spoke to an expert recently, works on helping people with sleep apnea, trying to, cure that, essentially, treat it. And he said that kids who have sleep apnea that's not treated have ADHD symptoms pretty consistently. And so it makes sense. You're not getting sleep, brain's less organized, all the cleanup that happens when you're supposed to sleep isn't happening. And so that can lead to a lot of the symptoms we associate with ADHD. The part that was surprising to me is that I just never really thought that we would be looking at sending kids to have sleep studies to check and see if they have sleep apnea. I'll include in the thing that I send out, there's a questionnaire that we call Stop Bang. It's based on the letters. It's each letter for a different symptom, and that can be a good way to screen whether sleep apnea is something you should be talking to your care provider about. So there's an insightful comment here about sleep apnea. And so sleep testing, home sleep testing, is usually the first step in evaluating for sleep apnea. Now, of the problems with sleep that are not related to kind of state of mind or mood symptoms or psychiatric conditions, of the things that are not that cause sleep problems, the vast majority of them case-wise are obstructive sleep apnea. But there are other things that constitute sleep problems. I mentioned narcolepsy. That is a sleep problem. Restless leg syndrome. That is a sleep problem. Parasomnias, which are, night terrors. Night terrors are a parasomnia. They are complications, sleep complication, which sometimes are hard to distinguish from PTSD. But either way, that is something that you wouldn't be able to test with a home sleep test. So there are, for other conditions like that, where they have to assess the brain activity, you would be sent for an in-hospital or in clinical setting polysomnography, which is the gold standard for sleep testing. And as the determination as to whether that's something that's appropriate should be done by a neurologist. And neurologists are the sleep medicine specialty is predominantly neurologists. There also are some respiratory doctors and pulmonologists who do that. There are some ENT doctors, ear, nose, and throat surgeons who are sleep medicine specialists. But essentially, if you're looking at whether polysomnography in hospital sleep testing is appropriate, those are the folks that you would go to try and determine that. So light therapy, what role does that have? Well, for people who have trouble waking up in the morning and where, basically your brain is not in sync with your clock and your, life responsibilities, light therapy, preferably or classically, these very large lights that create 10,000 lux. Well, what's 10,000 lux? Well, I'll tell you that like a 100-watt bulb, typical LED 100-watt bulb produces something like 1,200 lux. So 10,000 lux is a lot of light. So it actually can be really effective. It can help people wake up and be awake and be ready to go. And it also can try and get your circadian rhythm back on track. Because for some people, that has slid off track over time, which results in like not feeling ready for sleep until say 11 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning. So using that light therapy can be a way to help get things back on track. Someone was sharing that their mother had terrible insomnia, and it turns out that she was having a reaction to mold toxicity. That is really insightful because there could be things in your bed environment that are creating sleep problems. The other thing that's really interesting about that is that, a toxic substance obviously is going to kick your immune system into gear, right? Well, when your immune system is working hard and when there's inflammation, which is part of the way of trying to fight off or dealing with damage in the body, that goes against being able to sleep. The actual chemicals of the immune system, the cytokines, prevent sleep. They get in the way of sleep, like very directly. So not only might you want to look at your environment, but looking at nutrition, looking at your diet. I am very appreciative of people who have expertise in Eastern medicine and functional medicine, nutritionists and dietitians. There are a lot of people who are really excellent at helping us recognize what happens when our bodies are responding to various substances. So if you're having trouble sleeping, that's another thing to look at. There's a question about exercise and sleep. So exercise, besides making you tired, really does seem to help promote sleep. I think that it helps with regulating the sleep-wake cycle. It helps with dissipating and decreasing stress. Sleep also helps just with the neurochemistry of wakefulness and sleep. It increases dopamine levels, which make you more wakeful during the day, helps you be ready for sleep in the evening. So the question was actually about exercise in proximity to sleep. My simple response would be that I think people should follow their experience. Like if you find that working out at 8 p.m. Doesn't get in the way of sleep, actually helps you relax, then that's great. For other people, they find that exercising less than an hour before getting into bed is problematic. And that makes sense from the biochemistry standpoint, because exercise, among other things, it raises your body temperature, which goes against that desire for our body temperature to be lower in order for us to sleep. It also gets your adrenaline going, which again makes you more wakeful. So my way of looking at it is that if exercise is relaxing, probably helps you sleep. If the main result of the exercise is that you're just more energized and more awake, it may be hard to de-escalate after that. The question is about whether you have to be thoughtful about the timing of supplements that you take, like B vitamins and various things relative to sleep. I'll start by saying that I don't know the research, kind of the broader explanation. From my experience, just with the people I've seen, yes, there are some things that tend to be more energizing, and B vitamins are those. And so for some people, taking a B vitamin later in the day could, cause some issues. For other people, it doesn't seem to be a problem. There are other supplements that are tend to be positive in terms of being helpful, like valerian root, kava, L-tryptophan. But yeah, for things that are problematic, probably B vitamins. That's the first thing I would think of. Also, niacin also is kind of activating in riboflavin. But I would say, when there's a problem. Thank you very much for coming and sharing this time. Feel free to email us with questions or comments. I'd be happy to share other thoughts. I actually have a plethora of research articles that I found very interesting, but there wouldn't have been time to go through all that stuff. And it's, some of us science geeks love that stuff, for other people probably would be the thing that puts you to sleep. So again, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you the next time. We'll actually be talking about focus. So I will be sending out an invitation for that. But that's another one of those top things that comes up in my opportunity to see people and lively discussions about why we can't focus. So be on the lookout for that announcement. Take care. Thank you.